It looks very likely that Australia is going to offer some sort of pathway to citizenship for Hong Kong residents, at least those who are at the risk of political persecution in the city. Now, exactly what this pathway or what its visa looks like, we just don't know at the moment. Could it be, for example, something similar to what the Australian government did for Syrian refugees back in 2015, when it essentially offered an additional 12,000 humanitarian places for those who were affected by the devastating conflict there? Could it be, for example, a standalone new category of visas specifically designed for Hong Kong residents? At this stage, it's pretty speculative. But what the Prime Minister has made it clear is that the government wants to do something in this space, that Cabinet is going to consider a whole lot of options, presumably in the next week or two, if you pass his language closely. And then it seems likely, not certain, but likely, that it will move ahead to offer some sort of humanitarian pathway to Australia for people in Hong Kong. And that, of course, is a pretty significant gesture for Australia to make.
And not dissimilar to the response that the UK has given. Of course, the UK has a much closer relationship and ties with Hong Kong. How might they compare?
Yeah, the UK is in a slightly different position, of course, because it held Hong Kong for so long, and the people that it's already offering citizenship to already have a form, effectively, of overseas British citizenship, which the British government is essentially saying that it will extend. It will allow them to stay not for 6 months, which is what's permitted at the moment, but potentially for longer, for 5 years, and then look towards a pathway towards citizenship. So the UK is a bit more forward-leaning on this than we are, but that's not surprising, because of the deep historical links between the cities, between the city and between the UK. Australia is going to have to do something a little bit different because our circumstances are somewhat different. But look, the basic impulse that's driving the UK is the same one that's driving Australia.
We have, of course, rather strained relations with China at the moment. Surely this is going to drive a further wedge between the two nations.
Yes, I think it inevitably will. We already know that Beijing is enormously sensitive about Hong Kong. It bridles at any criticism, even of its behaviour and conduct in Hong Kong, let alone the actions of nations like the UK and Australia who are contemplating taking a step like this. If we were to offer a pathway to citizenship, that would be seen as a deep provocation by Beijing, and you can only imagine that it will send the relationship, which is already in pretty dire straits, tumbling down to even new depths. So there are risks here for Australia. But clearly the Morrison government at this stage is calculating that it's something that may well be worth doing. Not only, I'd suggest, because it might see a moral sort of clarity to this, but also because there are undeniable benefits to Australia. As people in the UK have already observed, there are many people in Hong Kong with a fair amount of capital. They're often highly skilled and entrepreneurial. So there's a feeling, I think, in Canberra, not only that this could be a morally correct thing to do, but also that it could be a useful thing to do. So there's self-interest at play here, Beverly, as well as the moral aspect.
You talked a little bit about the time frame Scott Morrison is thinking about. How quickly do you think we'll see some of the detail?
Well, I think there's two questions. There's the question of when are we going to see the announcement from the government, or an announcement by the government, and then there's the question of when might it be implemented. And now my suspicion, just judging from the Prime Minister's language, I don't have any certainty on this, but my suspicion, judging from what Scott Morrison said today, is that the Australian government is going to make an announcement pretty soon. You'd have to say most likely within weeks. That's if they do decide to press ahead with this, which I think is pretty likely. Then there's the next question. After the government makes this announcement, how do we go about implementing it? How long will it take to set up? And what resistance will China offer? Remember, Beijing has already said that it doesn't believe that the UK's proposal to take people from Hong Kong is legitimate. It says the UK has no right to do it. Could China block people, for example, who are going to places like the UK and Australia because it sees it as an infringement of its national sovereignty? Now, that would be a difficult thing for China to do, but given the uncertainty of the relationship, the high temperatures that run around this issue, the depth of resentment that is still reverberating in Beijing around its historical grievances around Hong Kong, you certainly wouldn't rule anything out.
Stephen Gedgets in Canberra, thanks so much.